On the 7th day of March, 161 AD, Antoninus Pius lay dying. He was 74 years old. He had ruled Rome for 23 years without a single major crisis, without a civil war, without a purge, without a spectacle of cruelty. He had been so consistently decent that later historians would struggle to write about him because decency does not make for dramatic narrative. His last act was characteristic. He summoned the captain of the Praetorian Guard and gave him one final order. He told him to transfer the golden statue of Fortuna, the goddess of luck and fate, from his own bedchamber to the bedchamber of Marcus Aurelius. It was the imperial equivalent of handing over the keys. Then Antoninus turned onto his side, as if falling asleep. And he died. The Roman Empire, 60 million souls spread across 3 continents, now belonged to a 39-year-old philosopher who had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment and hoping it would never come. And the first thing Marcus did was something no emperor had ever done before. He refused to rule alone. Antoninus had adopted 2 boys, Marcus and a younger man named Lucius Commodus, who had been renamed Lucius Verus. The original plan, engineered by Hadrian, was that both boys would eventually share power. But over the 23 years of Antoninus' reign, Marcus had emerged as the clear primary heir. Lucius Verus had been sidelined. He was given titles and honors but no real authority. Everyone understood that Marcus was the successor. Lucius Verus was the spare. When Marcus took the throne, the Senate offered him sole power. It was his for the taking. Lucius Verus had no political base, no military following, no independent claim. Marcus could have accepted sole rule and no one would have questioned it. Instead, he insisted that Lucius Verus be elevated to co-emperor. Equal in title. Equal in authority. He gave Verus the name Augustus. He gave him tribunician power. He arranged for Verus to marry his own daughter, Lucilla, binding the 2 families together. It was the first time in Roman history that there were 2 emperors with fully equal constitutional power. Why did he do it? The ancient sources speculate. Some say it was loyalty to Hadrian's original design. Some say it was philosophical principle, a Stoic's discomfort with the concentration of power. Some say Marcus simply did not want to carry the weight alone. Whatever the reason, it reveals something about Marcus that runs through every decision he ever made. He was not interested in maximizing his own position. He was interested in doing what he believed was right. Even when no one asked him to. Even when it cost him leverage. Even when it complicated the machinery of government. And it did complicate things. Because Lucius Verus was not Marcus Aurelius. He was charming, socially adept, physically handsome, and thoroughly unserious. He loved gladiatorial games. He loved banquets. He loved actresses and horse racing. He was not stupid. He was not malicious. He was simply a man who had been raised for pleasure and was now being asked to govern. The contrast between the 2 co-emperors must have been visible to everyone in Rome. Marcus, austere, thin, sickly, perpetually working, perpetually reading, perpetually in meetings. Verus, robust, entertaining, sociable, visibly enjoying the privileges of power in ways that Marcus seemed constitutionally incapable of enjoying. But Marcus never publicly criticized Verus. Never undermined him. Never maneuvered against him. He treated the co-emperorship as a genuine partnership, absorbing the greater share of the administrative burden without complaint. When Verus made mistakes, Marcus corrected the outcomes quietly. When Verus indulged, Marcus looked the other way. This was not naivety. This was strategy filtered through philosophy. Marcus understood that a public conflict between co-emperors would fracture the government. He understood that tolerating Verus' weaknesses was less costly than exposing them. And he understood, perhaps more deeply than any ruler before him, that you do not control other people. You control your own response to other people. The best revenge is to not be like that. He wrote those words in the Meditations. And he lived them in his relationship with Verus for 9 years. But the empire was not going to give the new co-emperors time to settle in. Within months of Marcus taking the throne, the world caught fire. In the east, the Parthian Empire attacked. Parthia was Rome's oldest and most sophisticated rival, an empire stretching across modern Iran and Iraq, with a military tradition that had humiliated Roman legions more than once. In 161, the Parthians invaded Armenia, a buffer state that both empires claimed, and annihilated the Roman garrison there. The governor of Syria mobilized his legions in response and was defeated. The eastern frontier, stable for decades under Antoninus, was collapsing. This was the first major military crisis of Marcus' reign, and it presented an immediate problem. Marcus himself was not a soldier. He had been trained in law, philosophy, and administration. He had never commanded troops in the field. He had never seen a battle. The bookish prince was now commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world, and that military was being beaten. The decision was made to send Lucius Verus east to command the Parthian campaign. This was partly practical. Verus was more physically robust and had more energy for the demands of campaign life, and partly political, giving Verus a military credential would strengthen the co-emperorship. Verus departed for the east in 162. And here, the sources become complicated. Because what happened next was a decisive Roman victory, one of the most successful eastern campaigns in imperial history. But whether Verus deserves the credit is a matter of considerable debate. The actual military operations were conducted by a series of brilliant generals, men like Avidius Cassius, Statius Priscus, and Marcius Verus. These were career soldiers, hard men forged on the frontiers, and they executed the campaign with devastating efficiency. Statius Priscus invaded Armenia and captured the capital, Artaxata. Avidius Cassius drove south into Mesopotamia, crossed the Euphrates, and sacked the Parthian capitals of Seleucia and Ctesiphon. It was a total victory. The Parthian Empire was broken for a generation. Roman prestige in the east was restored and then some. The legions had proven they were still the most lethal fighting force on earth. But Verus spent much of the campaign in Antioch. The great city of Syria was a metropolis of pleasure, famous for its theater, its cuisine, its social scene. And the sources, hostile to Verus, depict him essentially partying while his generals fought the war. He reportedly spent his evenings at banquets and his mornings recovering from them. He diced. He gambled. He attended performances. He took a mistress named Panthea, an actress of extraordinary beauty. How much of this is true and how much is character assassination by historians sympathetic to Marcus is impossible to know. Roman historiography was not journalism. It was morality play. Verus was the foil to Marcus, the pleasure lover contrasted with the philosopher, and the sources shade their portraits accordingly. What is clear is that Verus was present in the theater of operations, that his generals won decisively, and that the victory was officially attributed to both co-emperors. Marcus, who had stayed in Rome managing the civilian government, accepted the title Armeniacus and then Parthicus Maximus alongside Verus. The war was won. But the thing that came home with the legions was worse than anything the Parthians could have inflicted. In 166, the armies returned from the east. And they brought something with them. A disease. A plague. The soldiers had picked it up in Seleucia, or possibly in the overcrowded camps along the Euphrates, and as they marched west, they spread it through every province they passed through. By the time the legions reached Rome, the disease was moving faster than any army. It is known today as the Antonine Plague. Modern epidemiologists believe it was smallpox, though some argue for measles. The symptoms described by Galen, the great physician who personally treated Marcus, are horrifying. Fever. Skin eruptions. Internal ulceration. Diarrhea. Death, usually within 2 weeks. And the death toll was staggering. Precise numbers are impossible. Ancient demography is guesswork built on guesswork. But the estimates range from 5 million to 30 million dead across the Roman Empire over the course of the next 15 years. At its peak, the plague was reportedly killing 2,000 people a day in Rome alone. Let that number settle. 2,000 people a day. In a city with no modern sanitation, no understanding of germ theory, no antibiotics, no ventilators, no public health infrastructure beyond aqueducts and bathhouses that may have actually accelerated transmission. The bodies piled up faster than they could be burned. The smell of funeral pyres hung over Rome like weather. And Marcus Aurelius was responsible for all of it. Not responsible in the sense of having caused it. Responsible in the sense of being the one person who could not look away. Who could not lock the door and wait for it to pass. Who had to stand in the middle of the catastrophe and make decisions. He opened the imperial treasury. He funded physicians. He organized the disposal of bodies. He addressed the Senate with calm, measured assessments of the situation. He did not panic. He did not flee, as many wealthy Romans did, retreating to country estates to wait out the contagion. He stayed. And while he stayed, the plague reshaped the empire in ways that would haunt the remaining years of his reign. The military was decimated. Legions that had returned victorious from Parthia were now hollowed out by disease. Entire units were so depleted that they could not be reconstituted. The manpower crisis was existential. Rome's legions were not just the instrument of conquest. They were the border. They were the wall between Roman civilization and the tribal confederacies pressing in from the north. And that wall was suddenly full of holes. The economy contracted violently. Agricultural production dropped as laborers died. Tax revenues fell. Trade routes were disrupted. The price of goods rose. The empire, which had been running a comfortable surplus under Antoninus, was now hemorrhaging money. And in the north, beyond the Danube, the barbarian tribes were paying attention. They could feel it. The way predators feel weakness. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Iazyges, the Vandals, the Lombards, and dozens of other tribal groups who had been held in check by Roman military superiority for generations began to stir. They probed the border. They tested the garrisons. They found them undermanned. In 167, the dam broke. A massive coalition of Germanic and Sarmatian tribes crossed the Danube and invaded the Roman provinces of Rhaetia, Naricum, and Pannonia. Modern Austria, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. They did not raid and retreat, which was the usual pattern. They pushed deep into imperial territory. For the first time since the Cimbrian Teutons had terrified Rome 3 centuries earlier, barbarian armies were loose in the heartland of the empire. Some of them reached northern Italy. The city of Aquileia, one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the Western Empire, was besieged. Towns were burned. Populations were displaced. The psychological shock was immense. Italy itself, the sacred core of the empire, was under attack. Marcus had no choice. He had to go to war personally. The philosopher was going to become a general. The man who loved nothing more than a quiet evening with a book was going to spend the next 13 years of his life on the Danube frontier, sleeping in military camps, commanding legions, and fighting the most brutal and exhausting war of the 2nd century. But first he had to solve the manpower problem. And his solution tells you everything about the kind of ruler he was and the kind of crisis he was facing. The legions were short of men. The plague had killed soldiers faster than the normal recruitment system could replace them. The traditional solution would have been a massive conscription drive, pulling men from their farms and workshops and forcing them into service. This was legal. It was precedent. But it would have further damaged an already crippled economy. Instead, Marcus did something extraordinary. He armed gladiators. He purchased slaves and freed them on the condition that they serve in the legions. He recruited bandits from Dalmatia and Dardania, essentially hiring criminals as soldiers. He even enlisted Germanic tribesmen from beyond the frontier, using the enemies of today as the allies of tomorrow. The aristocrats were scandalized. Arming gladiators undermined the social order. Freeing slaves for military service violated deeply held prejudices. Recruiting barbarians diluted the Roman identity of the legions. Marcus did not care. He needed bodies on the frontier. He needed them now. And he was willing to offend every sensibility in Rome to get them there. he also needed money. And this is where one of the most remarkable and least discussed decisions of his reign occurred. Rather than raising taxes on a population already devastated by plague and economic contraction, Marcus held an auction in the imperial palace. He sold the gold and silver plate, the silk curtains, the artwork, the statuary, the jeweled goblets, even his wife's silk robes and gemstones. The Emperor of Rome sold his own possessions to fund the war. This was not a publicity stunt. The amounts raised were significant. And the gesture communicated something that money alone could not. The emperor was sharing the sacrifice. He was not asking his people to bear a burden he was unwilling to touch. It was Stoicism in action. Accept the things to which fate binds you, he would later write, and love the people with whom fate brings you together. He was not speaking abstractly. He was speaking from the experience of a man who sold his wife's jewelry to buy soldiers. In 168, Marcus and Lucius Verus marched north together to the Danube. It was the first time both co-emperors had left Rome simultaneously. The gesture was deliberate. This was not a frontier skirmish. This was an existential threat. And the empire needed to see both of its rulers on the front line. They established their headquarters at Aquileia, which had been relieved but was still shaken. From there, they began the process of reorganizing the northern defenses, assessing the damage, and planning the counteroffensive. And then Lucius Verus died. It happened in January of 169. The co-emperors were traveling back from the frontier, possibly to reorganize for the next campaigning season. Verus was on the road, somewhere near the town of Altinum in northeastern Italy, when he was struck by what the sources describe as a sudden illness. Some accounts say a stroke. Some say an apoplexy. Galen, who was traveling with the imperial party, described symptoms consistent with a cerebral hemorrhage. Lucius Verus was dead at 38. He had been co-emperor for 8 years. He had been Marcus' adoptive brother for 31 years. The sources, predictably, offer conflicting assessments. Some accuse Verus of being a liability whose death was a relief. Some accuse Marcus, or Marcus' wife Faustina, of having poisoned him. There is no credible evidence for this. The poisoning rumors that attach to nearly every imperial death in Roman history are the equivalent of conspiracy theories. They reflect the paranoid climate of court life more than actual events. What is clear is that Marcus mourned him. He deified Verus, as was customary for emperors who died without disgrace. He oversaw the funeral rites personally. He ensured that Verus' household was provided for. And he never spoke ill of him publicly. And now Marcus was alone. Sole emperor. Sole commander. Sole decision-maker for an empire in crisis on multiple fronts. The Danube frontier was still burning. The plague was still killing. The treasury was still draining. The legions were still undermanned. And every single one of these problems landed on the desk of a man who, if given the choice, would have been reading Epictetus in a garden. In the Meditations, there is a passage that reads like it was written during this exact period. Do not be distressed, do not despond or give up in despair, if now and again practice falls short of precept. Return to the attack after each failure, and be thankful if on the whole you can acquit yourself in the majority of cases as a man should. Return to the attack after each failure. That was not a motivational quote for Marcus. That was a survival strategy. The man was failing, in his own estimation, every single day. The workload was inhuman. The problems were unsolvable. The loss was constant. And he kept going. Not because he felt like it. Not because he had a breakthrough or a revelation or a moment of transcendence. But because the next problem was already on his desk, and nobody else was going to deal with it. This is the part of Marcus Aurelius that the Instagram accounts will never capture. Not the polished aphorism. Not the marble bust with the serene expression. The exhausted man. The grieving man. The man who buried his co-emperor and then turned around and walked back to the frontier because the Marcomanni were not going to wait for him to process his feelings. Before we go further into the wars, I need to tell you about Faustina. Because the woman who stood beside Marcus Aurelius during the worst years of his reign is one of the most misunderstood and unfairly maligned figures in Roman history. Aeneia Galeria Faustina, known as Faustina the Younger, was the daughter of Antoninus Pius, and the wife Marcus had married in 145 when he was still a young heir and she was barely a teenager. Their marriage lasted over 30 years. She bore him at least 13 children. She traveled with him to the frontier. She was given the title Mater Castrorum, Mother of the Camp, an honor that recognized her physical presence with the legions. And the ancient sources are vicious about her. The Historia Augusta, a notoriously unreliable collection of imperial biographies, accuses Faustina of serial adultery. It claims she took lovers among the gladiators and the sailors. It claims Marcus knew and tolerated it. It claims she conspired against him. Modern scholarship has largely demolished these accusations. The charges against Faustina follow a literary template that was applied to almost every powerful woman in Roman history. Livia, Agrippina, Messalina, Julia Domna, the pattern is always the same. If a woman was powerful, she was sexualized. If she was influential, she was accused of infidelity. If she outlived her usefulness to the narrative, she was turned into a villain. What we actually know about Faustina is this: Marcus loved her. He wrote about her with warmth and gratitude. In the Meditations, composed after her death in 175, he thanks the gods for a wife who was so obedient, so affectionate, and so simple. When she died, he was devastated. He deified her. He established a charitable fund in her name for girls from poor families. He named the military colony at the site of her death Faustinopolis. These are not the actions of a man who felt betrayed. These are the actions of a man who lost someone he depended on. Faustina's real story is the story of a woman who endured what Marcus endured, who buried child after child. Of their 13 known children, only 5 or 6 survived to adulthood. The rest died in infancy or childhood, victims of the same brutal mortality rates that afflicted every family in the ancient world, emperor or slave. Imagine that. 13 pregnancies. 7 or 8 tiny coffins. And through all of it, the duties of an empress, the travel, the public appearances, the expectation that she would be composed and dignified while her children died in her arms. Faustina deserves more than the slander history has given her. She deserves to be remembered as what she was, a woman who bore the weight of empire alongside her husband and paid for it with a grief that no title could soften. Marcus carried that grief too. He carried all of it. The dead children. The dead friends. The dead brother emperor. The dying soldiers. The plague victims. The weight of an empire that was cracking under pressures he could slow but not stop. And he kept writing in his notebook. The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now, take what is left and live it properly. These were not inspirational quotes. These were the field notes of a man fighting on 2 fronts simultaneously. The frontier outside and the darkness inside. And both battles were far from over. The Danube was waiting. The Marcomanni were regrouping. The worst years of Marcus' life were still ahead. And the philosopher was about to discover what his philosophy was actually worth.